Hey guys, welcome back. This is the MMA Breakdown, doing predictions for the Ultimate Fighter 22 finale, Edgar versus Mendes. Awesome main event. Really excited for this one. And there's some other really good matchups here too. I'm not sure yet what the main card is going to be, or the prelim card. Wikipedia only has 7 fights listed here, but there's no distinction between the main or prelim card. But yeah, 4 fights here that look really good. And because it is the finale for the Ultimate Fighter, I'll be doing a separate video for the finale matchup whenever that's revealed, I guess, the week of this fight, and whatever other fights that are going to be on this card with contestants from the show. So I'll be doing a separate video for that as soon as we get those matchups revealed. Follow me on Twitter, link in the description. Wearing my tap out shirt today, so go ahead and give me a thumbs up for that one, and a subscription. And also filming this before Thanksgiving, so I just want to say have a happy Thanksgiving, but also have my predictions out for Fight Night Namajunas versus Van Zandt already, trying to stay ahead, so check out my predictions for that. And if you haven't seen my predictions yet for Fight Night Seoul, Henderson versus Masvidal, which is still a week away, check those out. And then after this, of course, we're on to 194, which I'm very excited to do a video for. Okay, but yeah, so 7 fights here. Again, not sure where the prelim card ends and where the main card starts, but let's just get right to it. So at heavyweight, Gabriel Gonzaga versus Konstantin Erokhin. Kind of a interesting matchup. Not too sure who's going to win here. Erokhin, I thought, was looking really good against Victor Pesta. Showed really fluid boxing and big power, especially for a heavyweight, and looked like he was going to run away with it early there. But then once Pesta took him down, that was it. Couldn't get up for the rest of the fight and was just out-wrestled and held down. And Gonzaga, I think he is capable of doing that. Strong grappler, one of the best grapplers all time in the UFC heavyweight division, and did get Crow Cop down in their last fight. But the way that he lost to Crow Cop, especially after getting the fight where he wanted to on the mat, mounting Crow Cop, and he still couldn't submit him, and then letting Crow Cop come back and getting finished by him, that to me proved that Gonzaga just doesn't have anything left, and is not capable of competing at a high level in the UFC anymore. But then again, it wasn't all that long ago that he had a knockout win over Sean Jordan, and a little bit before that submitted Ben Rothwell. So the guy still has skills, he's still dangerous, but I just really didn't like how he lost to Crow Cop. That was not a good look for him. So I think I'm going to go with Erokhin here. Liked how his striking looked. Gonzaga could hold him down, out-grapple him, but you got to go with the young blood. So going with Erokhin. All right, next up at flyweight, Justin Scoggins versus Joby Sanchez. This should be a fun fight too, but I think Scoggins is the good bet here. Sanchez has struggled with the technique in both of his UFC fights against Wilson Hayes, which was a really tall order for his debut fight. But against Wilson Hayes, he got out-grappled for the whole fight, got his back taken standing, and had to fight off the choke for a round there. But then late in the fight, I think it was the 3rd round, nailed him with a head kick that dropped him, and came close to finishing the fight. And also against Matsuda, wasn't doing too well from what I remember. I think it was an even fight, and he was eating some punches. He lost the split decision, but I think he also dropped Matsuda late in that fight. Actually, before I looked at his record, I remembered him knocking him out, finishing him, but I guess he didn't. So an opportunist, he hustles, he's quick, but Scoggins is the more well-rounded guy. He has a takedown game. He's dynamic on the feet. I remember against Moraga, he dropped him with a side kick to the thigh. He's just one of these dynamic guys. Pulls out a lot of unorthodox moves. But the thing with Scoggins is that, sometimes he just slips up, like against Moraga, even though I thought he was looking really good and winning on the feet in that fight. Kept going for the takedown, and Moraga kept going for that guillotine off of the takedown attempt, and eventually he subbed him out with it. But also Scoggins, I was on the bandwagon from the beginning. I really think he's kind of leveled off, and he's not improving like a hot prospect typically does. Josh Sampo in his last fight, that performance wasn't that dominant for Scoggins, and Sampo's not really an elite guy at all at flyweight. This is a guy that Paddy Houlihan took out in the first round. Scoggins should be able to get him out of there. Also, the Will Campazano fight, which was only a second one in the UFC, a similar performance where he looks like he's on cruise control and just doing the bare minimum to get by. So just want to make that side note that Scoggins, I don't think he's really going to turn out to be the title contender that we had all thought he would. But here I think he definitely has the technical advantage and is just more well-rounded. He's got the grappling, and on the feet I think he'll have a big technical advantage. So definitely taking Scoggins here for the decision. Next up at featherweight, Mirsad Bektic versus Tatsuya Kawajiri. Kawajiri, even though he got that win over Seaver in his last fight, I didn't think he won the fight, first of all, but even if you thought he won, that was not an impressive performance. Very uneventful fight. Both guys just looked like they were in sparring practice. And then his fight against Clay Guida, I didn't think that was impressive at all. He just showed he can't really wrestle with a guy who's not at the top of the division and who's not in his prime. And he also got dropped by a guy who has very sloppy and unrefined striking, who just throws wild haymakers. Bektic, I think, is going to probably finish Kawajiri here. Bektic has been super impressive. His last fight against Martins was beating him on the feet, tagged him a few times, took him down, and then quickly pounded him out. This guy out-wrestled Chaz Skelly in his debut, which was very impressive. Skelly coming off of a really nice performance over Kevin Souza, and looking back, that win for Bektic, out-wrestling him, out-grappling him, looks very good. And then, what was the other fight he had in between? Oh yeah, Paul Redmond, again, where he just showed very dominant grappling and wrestling, took him down all day. Bektic is really a top-tier prospect, and I think he's really going to break into that top 10 very soon. And Kawajiri, other than the Sean Soriano fight, which he was losing on the feet, I just don't think the Guida or the Seaver performances were really impressive at all. So definitely going with Bektic here. And I think he does probably get a finish. The guy's really surging right now, so going with Bektic. All right, and next up at welterweight, and I assume these fights, these fights definitely will probably be on the main card, but at welterweight, Ryan Laflare versus Mike Pierce. This is a really interesting fight, the return of Mike Pierce, coming back after that brutal submission loss to Husamar Palhares. The fight that got Palhares booted from the UFC, but that was so long ago, 2 years at this point, and it's really felt much longer than that. And coming back against a solid guy like Laflare, who has had some pretty solid performances, not really a breakout one yet, not a win over a top guy, but a guy who's been solid, who's shown good, really strong wrestling, and more than that, scrambling ability. I think it's just going to be too much for Pierce after the layoff. If this was Pierce before the layoff, I think it's a dead even fight. Pierce, I think, still will have the power advantage. Ryan Laflare, this guy can get tagged, and his striking isn't really there yet. Even though he dominates guys with his wrestling, against John Howard, he got tagged a few times in that fight, got put on wobbly legs, and in the Ponzinibbio fight, which he was dominating in the third round, Ponzinibbio was able to tag him, and he survived in both of those fights. But it is worth considering that he has been tagged, and I think Pierce is a way more powerful striker than either of those guys. Pierce hasn't knocked anyone out of note, but the David Mitchell fight, and what was the other one? Oh, Aaron Simpson, where he came back from almost being finished himself. He showed one-shot knockout power. So I do think that's an advantage Pierce has. But Pierce, his wrestling has never really been as dominant as what Laflare has shown. The Carlos Hocha fight, a guy who was a dangerous grappler, Pierce was able to get him down a few times, but didn't really hold him down and didn't, beat him up on the ground. And Pierce, he can be hit too. In the Seth Baczynski fight, he was just kind of standing in front of Baczynski the whole time, and even though he was coming forward, landing shots, Baczynski was able to get his shots in. It was the longer fighter. I just think Laflare, he's shown that strong wrestling, not against Damian Maia. That was a wake-up call for him. But against Court McGee and Ponzinibbio, really solid wrestling. He's a great scrambler. His hands aren't terrible. He can be tagged, but just considering that layoff, I like Laflare here. I think he wins a decision. All right, next up at lightweight, Joe Lauzon versus Evan Dunham. This is a real fun fight. I think it should just be a grappler lover's feast. But Lauzon, this guy's striking has really improved nicely of late. He's a guy that I really was criticizing heavily. You go back to the Mac Danzig fight a couple years ago, and his boxing just looked horrible, both defensively and offensively. Danzig was working him to the body, and every time Danzig came forward, he would just cover up and he'd leave his body exposed, and then he didn't really have an answer on the feet. And you compare that to his Chiesa fight and even his fight against Iaquinta where he got knocked out, but he's been working on his jab. He uses his jab to cover distance now, and he has like a triple jab that he's been using lately, and he's more aggressive with his hands, not as wild and open as he used to be in the past. And that really impressed me. I didn't expect that. And Dunham, that Pearson fight, his last fight, that impressed me. Dunham, when he fights the more athletic guys, the dangerous strikers, he just looks bad. Like Barboza was just able to, land that body kick early and put him away. But Dunham is really underrated. He had a super close fight with RDA, Rafael Dos Santos, that easily could have gone his way. And against Pearson, he brought back the jiu-jitsu and the ground control, which we hadn't seen from him from a long time. If you think back to his Tyson Griffin fight or the one before that, Escudero, the guy himself is a really technical grappler and a technician on the ground. He can submit guys too. But, if this fight does go to the ground, which I think it will, I don't like Dunham's chances going sub for sub with Lauzon. I mean, Lauzon is the OG when it comes to submission grappling. Dunham's good, and I think he's underrated on the ground, but Lauzon, you got to give him the edge there. And on the feet, like I said, Lauzon has been making improvements. Dunham's striking, it's effective. It's very limited. He throws that lead hook a lot, which is kind of the go-to move for guys who don't have really developed striking. And he can get in brawls. I remember the TJ Grant fight. That was dead even, and he easily could have won the decision there. And he's pretty aggressive and tenacious with his striking. But Lauzon, I like those technical developments he's been making lately. I think that those developments are going to show here. And if it goes to the ground, I think Lauzon's just going to come out on top eventually. So I got to go with Lauzon, and I'll say by sub. All right, next up at lightweight, the co-main event, Edson Barboza versus Tony Ferguson. How disappointing is it that Nurmagomedov fell out? That was a hot fight, almost as good as Nurmagomedov's original matchup when he was supposed to make his return against Cerrone. But now it's Barboza versus Ferguson, which is not a bad fight. But honestly, I'm not a Barboza fan, and I'm just not too high on this matchup. But Barboza versus Ferguson, I think Barboza has the edge in the technical striking. Ferguson, he looked really good against Josh Thompson. He was switching his stances, and he uses his length well and his range well in his striking. Cuts angles well. I think Barboza has the technical advantage. He's not a very high volume striker, and I think it's really kind of concerning his last fight with Paul Felder. Paul Felder, that was only his second fight or his third fight in the UFC, and he gave Barboza everything he could handle. Barboza won that fight, but just barely. He got cut up, he got bloody, and I just think it kind of goes to show Barboza, he's not a very dominant fighter. He's a dangerous striker. He's got dangerous moves. He's very athletic, but he's not a guy who's going to dominate, and he doesn't really throw enough volume to dominate. Even in the Bobby Green fight a year ago, he clearly had the advantage, but he was on cruise control and a performance where he just did enough to get by. The Michael Johnson fight, he was backed up, he was pressured, and he didn't really have an answer for it. And more than anything, Barboza can be hurt. He is easily hittable, and he gets dropped a lot. The Danny Castillo fight, he was dropped in the first round, nearly finished. Against Cerrone, when he was doing really well early, just took one punch with Cerrone moving backwards, and he dropped him. And was there another fight where he got finished recently? No, that was it. And then the Jamie Varner fight, of course, years ago. I think early Barboza will be scoring points. He'll have the better technique. But Ferguson, this guy's a finisher, and he's aggressive. And when he has you hurt, he jumps on you. The Kakuno fight, and especially the Gleison Tebow fight, where he just poured it on Tebow early in the fight, hurt him, and then took his back, subbed him out. Barboza will get hit at some point. He will be hurt, and he'll be dropped. He just takes too many shots for him not to get hurt in this fight. Paul Felder, was able to answer every strike that Barboza threw. He threw one right back. So Ferguson, I think, will definitely tag him at some point and hurt him, and then either submit him or just win the fight from there. So I'm going with Ferguson. Barboza, I think he'll have some success early, but Ferguson will pull through and he'll get the finish. All right, and then the main event at featherweight, Frankie Edgar versus Chad Mendes. Like I said at the top, awesome main event. I wanted to see this matchup for years. This was, I thought, always the hot fight to make at featherweight, outside of a title fight, or probably even more exciting than Jose Aldo fight, to be honest. But Edgar versus Mendes, I think there are two very likely outcomes here. Either Edgar's going to get finished, he's going to get knocked out within the first two rounds, or Edgar's just going to win a decision. I do not see Mendes being able to win a decision at all. And why do I think Edgar will get knocked? If Mendes wins, why is it going to be a knockout within the first two rounds? Well, Edgar, even for all of his footwork and all of his movement, he's still proven throughout his career to be very hittable. The Gray Maynard fights, classic example. In both of the fights, early on, they looked like exactly the same fight. He got tagged, he got dropped, hit big. He got hurt, bloodied. Even the Ben Henderson fight, the first one, he ate a ton of jabs, and Henderson was just able to pick him apart really on the feet the entire fight. And yeah, Edgar is hittable. At featherweight, that hasn't really been the case, although his first fight at featherweight against Charles Oliveira, Oliveira, he was pretty much with him the entire time on the feet there. Edgar did win, but Oliveira, I wouldn't say he got dominated. He got his fair share of shots in. And then against Cub Swanson, I thought that Edgar was going to be hit a lot more there. He actually used his wrestling very well, and looked more dominant in that fight with his wrestling than we had ever seen him at lightweight, and hardly got hit at all in that fight. Was very aggressive. Was getting him down and relentless with his ground and pound until he got the finish in the 5th round. And then against Uriah Faber in his last fight, I didn't think that was a very impressive performance, and of course, if he didn't do so well against Faber, if he wasn't so dominant, what's he going to do to Mendes? Because Mendes is younger, is a lot more athletic, more explosive, and has that huge knockout power. Well, I don't think, that matchup against Faber, I don't think that really translates here to this fight. But yeah, Edgar is hittable. Mendes super explosive. He's just, he's a classic example and an archetype of a guy who, with his build, who's short, compact, very explosive, and has huge knockout power. And he's not wild. He doesn't have sloppy technique. He's a pretty accurate striker. So that's why I think Edgar can get put out. But I think actually it's more likely that Edgar is going to win a decision. I don't think he's going to get put out because it hasn't happened in his UFC career. And even though I said Edgar's hittable, even though he has all the fancy footwork and everything, Mendes, other than those big haymakers he throws, he just doesn't have really much else of a game. And yeah, I know against McGregor, he was taking him down, but I don't see him taking down Edgar like that. I think Edgar's going to survive the early storm, and then from there, I think Edgar's attack is just too varied for Mendes. He'll start taking him down. He's going to use that jab. He's going to be in and out. Mendes will tire, and we just haven't seen Mendes ever really win a dominant decision, at least not in the UFC. I was really impressed that he was able to go 5 hard rounds with Aldo and dropped him early a few times, but he did get hurt throughout that fight. And Edgar against Aldo, he didn't do the damage that Mendes did, but he made the adjustments in the fight and started to take over in the later rounds there. Edgar makes adjustments as the fight goes on. He figures guys out. And Mendes, other than that big power, I just think that's something that Edgar in camp, he's going to be able to train to avoid. And, from there, Mendes, I think, is the stronger guy, more explosive. But as far as technical wrestling goes, I think Edgar, he's a lot more persistent, and he's got better chain wrestling than Mendes. Mendes is he just has that big double leg, that big shot, the blast double. But Edgar, he'll work a single, he'll use trips, he'll cut angles. I think the attack is just going to be too varied for Mendes. He's going to be kind of lost and frustrated there as the fight goes on. So I think Edgar's going to win a decision. I do think Mendes, again, has a very good chance of finishing him early. He's super powerful and explosive. And Edgar, he took some shots in the Faber fight. He got bloodied up a little bit, and he wasn't that dominant. He wasn't really even able to get a clean takedown on Faber. But Faber, I think he's a lot different than Mendes. He's always darting around the cage, and He's a lot more in and out, whereas Mendes is just gonna stand there and look to throw his big haymakers. And I think Edgar's gonna weather that, and is just gonna take over from there with the wrestling. And his footwork and his jab are gonna come into play there big in the later rounds. So I got Edgar winning the decision. All right, guys, those are my predictions for the Ultimate Fighter 22 finale, Edgar versus Mendes. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter. My link is in the description. And also check out my predictions for the Nami Yunus Van Zant fight night. And also fight night Seoul, Henderson versus Masvidal. And next up, we've made it, guys. UFC 194, Aldo versus McGregor. Very excited to do my predictions for that. Easily the best UFC card of all time. And you know what? I'm taking McGregor. One of the few times that I'm actually going to take McGregor. I think I only took him in the Brandao fight, actually. The Brandao and Seaver fight in his entire UFC career. I've picked against him too many times, and I've been working on a very good breakdown in my head of why he's going to win this fight, and I'll explain it to you next time. So stay tuned for that. And also don't forget, once we find out the finale fight for this, I'll be doing another video for that. All right, guys, take care. I'll see you next time. Bye.